All right, Pyromaniacs, as promised, I am graced to be on a hangout with a genuine hero. Chris Wesseling is a former writer for NBC Sports and, of course, doled out football advice as senior NFL editor at Roto World. He is the writer for Around the NFL and can be heard as one of the voices on the Around the NFL podcast. Mr. Wesseling, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Mo. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It is certainly my pleasure for you I thank you for fitting me to your very busy day out there on the West Coast. Now, many pyromaniacs should be familiar with your NFL, but tell some listeners some of the things you're involved with and where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter. My name is Chris and Wesseling, Wesseling. That's my handle. NFL.com/Wesseling will have all of my features and news updates, all the articles we write on a daily basis. And then long form, you can find me at NFL.com/Ohio River Offense and NFL.com/LoveYaBlue, LUVYA, the color blue.
Yeah, and Pyromaniacs, follow me, as you know, at PyromaniacMo, and I did just tweet out a couple of articles from Chris, and we'll continue to do so as this podcast hits the airwaves. Now, Mr. Wesseling, at Pyro, we're, of course, fantasy football, we're always trying to peel back the curtain. We kind of steal in the Bible. Instead of feed a man for a day, we want to teach a fish, and we want to do so in the fantasy world as well. So we're always peeling back the curtain, letting folks know where we're getting our information, whether it's a specific website, a data point, cool. Is there something that you use during the regular season that you find particularly useful?
The best tool is NFL Game Pass. Watch the games. Trust your eyes. That's my favorite tool. I will double check with Pro Football Focus quite a bit and see if we're on the same page. Football Outsiders, I will check more for team-oriented stuff. And, of course, Roto World for updates every day. But mostly I want to watch the games and see the players for myself and try to get it ahead of the curve on guys. And I think, to me, in football, it will always be game film over stats.
I hear you. I just talked to several guys, actually, with my fantasy football talks I'm doing on the Pyro Light, and they are constantly saying Game Pass. I was just checking it out, and it's fantastic how you can search for a specific player, watch all the targets, watch all this. It's fantastic. I just watched all of Jermaine versus Lockett just to see who I liked. The statistics were very similar, but Lockett certainly stood out to me as one that I think will take a leap forward, and I probably wouldn't have known that had I not even watched all the film.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Lockett, to me, is clearly the more talented guy. Curse is a great role player for the Seahawks, but especially for fantasy, I think there's no question you'd want Lockett.
Yeah, not only, especially if you're in a league with the punt, kick, return bonus, but just he had a little bit something special that Curse did. He didn't seem to have as many yards after the catch. Curse didn't. But their stat lines, if you're just looking at the box scores, very similar from last year. And, of course, I was kind of high on Curse because he was a free agent, and I thought maybe if he went somewhere, there might be something interesting. Of course, he did not. Now, every year you guys do a 99 most important free agents. I believe that's you and Rosenthal, I believe. Sticking to the fantasy relevance, quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, who do you think is going to be the biggest success story from this free agency?
I tend to like a lot of the guys, a lot of the signings that the fantasy crowd did not like. But one that I think a lot of people agree on, my favorite signing was Ladarius Green to the Steelers. That offense is so loaded, and I feel like he's that field stretching guy. How are you going to cover him down the seam when you have to cover Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, Marcus Wheaton, Sammy Coates? I just feel like he's a great fit for Ben Roethlisberger. And I actually kind of like DeMarco Murray in Nashville. Mike Mularkey has always saddled up workhorse backs. And as much as I didn't like Murray last year, I feel like he's probably saved his legs a lot of wear and tear by being benched toward the end of the year for Ryan Matthews and Darren Sproles. So to me, DeMarco Murray is he's kind of an intriguing fit there in Nashville.
Well, that's one of the questions I was going to ask you a little bit later. Right now, has to do with Murray and basically what's going on with Malarkey and that system. Now, as many Pyromaniacs know, I like Mariota a lot this year. I really think he can take a huge jump. We just finished up our second version draft kit, and I currently have him at 13, just outside 1 in a 12-team league. Now, in honesty, and I see him even going higher in my specific tiers. You said that this second-year player, Marcus Mariota, chance at greatness. Now, of course, this is just his second year. What do you see this year, year 2, for Mariota under Mike Malarkey?
I expected him to take a big step forward because he was so hard to grade last year because he had the worst running back talent in the league. His offensive line couldn't protect him, and he had very little speed at wide receiver. And I think, especially if they pick up Laramie Tunsil, he might struggle a little bit early on. But if you move Taylor Lewan to right tackle, they picked up a new center in free agency. The guard play would be a little bit better. I think he'll be protected more. And I think I like the Rashard Matthews signing there too. So you get a new weapon in there. I think Dorial Green-Beckham will play quite a bit more, and I think DeMarco Murray will give them that steady running game they didn't have to keep defenses honest. And I love Mariota's ball placement. I think it's special. And I think his footwork, to me, is very Joe Montana-esque. I think he's the perfect quarterback for a rollout type of offense. I think they're going to do a lot of play action, which suits his game. I think the two biggest things he has to work on is taking fewer sacks and throwing the ball down the field and outside the numbers. He was mostly a middle-of-the-field kind of player, and it's hard to blame him because Delaney Walker was his only real threat.
Yeah, I think the most passes to tight end, percentage-wise, something like 41% of his passes was going to Delaney Walker. So Rashard Matthews, the guy you talked about, he only played 11 games last year, I believe, 662 yards, 4 touchdowns. But do you see him as a good number 2 in that system?
I do. I always thought he was underutilized in Miami, and last year he averaged 75 yards a game until his season ended, I believe, with fractured ribs right around mid-November. But 75 yards a game is nothing to sneeze at for a number 2 receiver. I think he can get it done. Yeah,
I agree. I like the move there. And, I, too, like DeMarco Murray. I don't know if I'm as high as some other folks, but do I hear you saying you think he's going to be more the DeMarco Murray we saw in Dallas as opposed to struggling running back we saw in Philly last year?
Well, I think he'll be somewhere in between. I don't expect him to ever come close to what he did in Dallas, but I could see 1,200 yards at maybe 4.5 yards a carry, which would be a big step up from what he did in Philadelphia last year.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be in between, but more toward the good side, I would think. Now, another thing you were just talking about was some offensive line. Now, with that you guys do, I think in fantasy, we tend to overlook offensive lines quite a bit. Now, one that's catching my eye lately is Seattle. They've been really blowing up that offensive line, and I'm expecting it to sort of impact the rushing game in a negative way. Thomas Rawls, I love the kid, but I don't know if he'd be able to take as much advantage of the situation football owners hope with that offensive line. Are there any offensive line feel are going to be in some real trouble next year?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I think we all in the industry and on Twitter, we tend to pretend to have a mastery of offensive line play that we don't have. I don't sit there and dissect guards and centers when I'm watching Game Pass. I don't know of anybody who does. That said, I agree. The Seahawks look like they're in trouble after losing Russell Okung and J.R. Sweezy, and they picked up Bradley Soul and Jamarcus Webb, guys who have been turnstiles over the past few years. So I know they count on Tom Cable to use smoke and mirrors there, but of course that has to be a concern. I haven't seen the Colts upgrade their offensive line yet, so that has to remain a concern. That's been a problem area for the last few years. And I think the 49ers had one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL last year. They've done little to upgrade. So those would be the first three teams I think of when I think of offensive line play that might struggle again.
Well, going to another questions here before I ask you about the other side of the coin with offensive lines. San Francisco. Now, many folks, including you, have basically said they're going to be unwatchable next season. That offensive line not looking good. And in particular, Carlos Hyde. Everybody in fantasy, it seems to me when I'm listening to different pundits, that they really are hyping this guy. Now, I totaled it up, and he's averaging about 3.8 yards per carry on games he's been given the ball at least 10 times or more. Now, we saw a flash of what he could do week 1 against Minnesota. But to me, that's kind of the outlier. They really had a favorable game script. They were playing from lead, and I don't know how often they're going to be doing that next year. And I think that's going to hurt the run game there, and in particular, Mr. Hyde. So how do you think of Carlos with that offensive line that he's heading in with in 2016?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful of extrapolating what he did in a Jeep Christ offense and putting that onto Chip Kelly, because it's a totally different offense. I like Carlos Hyde's talent. From a fantasy perspective, I'd probably stay away from the 49ers just because even with Chip Kelly, who's been known to, extract offense out of whoever's there, I just don't see the surrounding talent. And that offensive line, I think, will be one of the worst in the league. We have to see what happens in the draft yet, but we don't know. I don't think we know yet whether Anthony Davis is coming out of retirement. He didn't show up for the start of their offseason program. I think there's a lot of questions there, and I would stay away from the 49ers for now. Who knows what that roster will look like after the draft, but yeah, I like Carlos Hyde's talent. I just don't know if I'd be backing him this year.
Yeah, I agree. He's lower in my ranks than I think most folks. Pyromaniacs, I'm fortunate enough to be here with Chris Wesseling from the NFL. You can follow him at Chris Wesseling. That's ChrisWesseling. I was asking you about poor offensive lines. We talked a little about Seattle. They've been losing a lot of guys. San Fran hasn't done much now. It's April, right? It's April 2016, so we got a ways to go. But on the other side of the coin, are there any offensive people that are really moving in the right direction that could really have a positive impact on their offensive skill positions?
Yeah, I think you have to look at the Raiders, and they might be up there with the Cowboys now. They re-signed Donald Penn, and that interior, you've got Rodney Hudson, Gabe Watson, and Kelechi Osemele. I don't know if it gets much better than those three on the inside. So to me, the Raiders have a really good offensive line. And the Titans have a chance to be very much improved if they draft Laramie Tunsil, but that's a big if.
Yeah, I like the Raiders too. And what do you think of Latavius Murray? I've always kind of liked him. A lot of people are really all over the board with him. I like what we've seen, but I don't know if he can necessarily sustain it, although I do like the kid. So what do you think about the Oakland running back?
I've never been a big fan. I know he's big and fast, but I don't quite trust his instincts, and he's too upright in his running style. I thought he was, even though he got 1,000 yards last year, a little bit of a disappointment, and I think the Raiders will draft somebody fairly early to be a partner for him.
Another guy in Latavius Murray, where folks seem to be all over the board, but a big one is Cam Newton. Now, he finished number one, and it's been since 2003, 2004 since a quarterback finished number one in back-to-back seasons, Dante Culpepper. Now, in fairness, Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers had a 3-year stretch each where they finished 2-1-2. But it's hard to do. It's hard to finish 1-2 years in a row at any position, especially the quarterback position. A lot of hype for Cam. There was a lot of hype for Michael Vick a few years back. Now, Newton's getting Kelvin Benjamin back in the fold, which has to bode well for him. But if I were to paraphrase a bit of Public Enemy's Flavor Flav here, don't believe the hype. Should we not believe the hype in Cameron Jarrell Newton, or did you like what you see with him and you think he can do it again?
Well, I don't know if it has to be one extreme or the other. I think he's probably going to be a great fantasy quarterback again. I don't expect another MVP season. He had an incredibly easy schedule. especially against pass defenses last year. I don't know if he can catch lightning in a bottle like he did and get quite that hot. He's been known throughout his career to have mechanical flaws and to be highly inconsistent in his delivery. So to me, I wouldn't expect it to be quite as smooth as sailing this year, even with Benjamin back. I think he'll be an asset, obviously, to the Panthers, probably an MVP candidate, but I don't think you're getting 35 and 10 for touchdown to interception ratio again.
Yeah, lightning in a bottle is a good way to put it. I think he's going to be right up there, but I can expect exactly a repeat performance. Before we move on to the wide receiver position, which I want to talk about a little bit, and someone you were touting as of late, you mentioned earlier, I wrote it down, but you mentioned in Pittsburgh, a lot of turnover there, a lot of folks in the news, shall we say, but let's on some positive stuff in Pittsburgh. Ladarius Green, you said you really liked him. Now, I recently was looking at some stats. He was really thought to be a fantastic tight end coming out of college. Just never really seemed to get there. Of course, he was playing behind one of the best, perhaps all-time tight ends, Daniel Gates. But Gates last year finished much higher in fantasy and was on the field for less passing snaps. Now, Darius has just never shown it. Now, I think he's got a great opportunity to show it this year. He's got a great situation. But to me, there's a lot of tight ends that are going to go around the same spot that I'm pretty confident are going to finish in the top 10. I'm not as confident with Ladarius. I think he could go sort of either way. I think there are safer bets going right around the same time as Ladarius. How well do you think Ladarius is going to do in Pittsburgh, especially given his opportunity with the loss of Martavis Bryant?
Well, I would take exception to the notion that he hasn't shown it, because I think he has. And especially down the stretch last year on Game Pass, he jumped off the screen. This guy's one of the fastest tight ends in the league. He's a red zone threat. And I don't hold it against him at all that Antonio Gates, a Hall of Famer, was playing ahead of him. To me, that's extenuating circumstances, and I would never hold that against him. I think he'll be an every down player in Pittsburgh, and he'll thrive in that offense. So if you're looking for numbers, I'd say probably 800 yards is reasonable, maybe 6 or 7 touchdowns.
I think that's certainly fair. I just think a lot of people are really hyping him, and I think there's a greater risk, and we've never really seen it translate into goodness when I'm more excited with maybe a Flinker or someone like that. Now, the wide receivers, tight ends, wide receivers, they are all on the uptick. The passing taking over fantasy. Running backs ain't what they used to be. Now, there are superstars, the guys that are going to win you a week, and there's these supreme value guys like Decker or Hearns. Now, I want to focus on Hearns. Not a guy that's going to win you a fantasy week, but man, for consistency, he is hard to beat. The man totaled 10 touchdowns last season and spread out over 9 games. Had 11 double-digit fantasy point games and through 16. I love the guy. He's super consistent. But I recently heard, Chris Wesseling, you say on around the podcast, which my compliments to you. I listened to you guys time. I heard you say that he's one of the 10 best receivers in the league. So taking out fantasy for a moment, what do you see that makes him an elite receiver in your eyes?
I think I was referencing Allen Robinson as a top 10 receiver. If I said Hearns, I definitely misspoke, because I don't see him as a top 10 wide receiver. Allen Robinson, absolutely, I do see that. But Hearns, I'm not sure if I'd put him in the top 25. They kind of remind me of 10 years ago, Chad Johnson and T.J. Houshmandzadeh, whereas Allen Robinson is in the Chad Johnson role, and Hearns is in the Hoosh role as more of a possession receiver who runs good routes, and Blake Bortles knows where he is and leans on him in third down situations. But I think Hearns is a very solid number 2. I would not call him a number 1.
And do you think Bortles, Hearns, and Robinson totaled the most 20 receptions in the league this year, 39, I believe, if you add them all up, or maybe it was 39 for Robinson. Regardless, they were the most 20-yard pass plays for a duo. Do you think Bortles is going to be able to keep up, or do you see some regression in Bortles' game now that the running game should be more a part of that offense next year?
I think that's who Blake Bortles is. I think that's his playing style. He's aggressive. He goes down the field, and I don't see any reason why that will change. Maybe defensive backs will stop allowing Allen Robinson to get behind them quite as much. I don't know if he'll take them by surprise like he did last year, but he's going to be one of the best downfield threats in the league. Hearns tends to slip through the cracks a little bit. I don't know if he'll be quite as consistent with the big plays, but I do think that's their offense. I think that they go for the home run, and I think that's Bortles' strength.
There's going to be some regression, though, with Bortles. I agree with you. He likes the big play, got the cojones to it. But, man, 100 red zone targets tied with Aaron Rodgers for most in the league this year. I don't know if we're going to see that again, especially now they've got some more running backs there. There's got to be some negative regression that's going to happen. Passing game, how much we shall see. Now from another quarterback from Bortles over to a couple guys I want to talk about. Really, RG Fitzpatrick. Now, I believe, if my research is correct, you said recently Josh McCown is better than those cats. Now, let's start with Fitzpatrick. Last season, he was a streaming. I picked him up when Roethlisberger was out. Got me all the way to second place. If ODB would have played my championship week, who knows? But anyway, Fitzpatrick finished with 31 touchdowns, 3,900 passing yards. However, 2 seasons prior, he couldn't break 2,500 passing yards, nary 18 touchdowns in any one of those 2 seasons before last year. I'm skeptical that Fitzpatrick can repeat. I currently have my 19th running back, or my 19th quarterback in our upcoming draft kit. What do you think about Fitzpatrick, regardless of where he lands? I mean, I'm sure that's going to make a huge difference, but do you think Fitzpatrick can show us the magic again next year?
No, I don't. I think it's instructive to look not only at NFL history, but his history. Ever since the NFL merger in 1970, if you look back, there's a quarterback every year who is over 30 years old and a journeyman and just breaks out and has an unbelievable season. Everything goes perfectly. And he was that guy last year. But the history tells you that's not going to keep happening year after year with that guy. He's going to regress to the mean. And even with 2 power forwards in Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker, if he resigns, I just don't see Fitzpatrick playing that consistently. And it's never out of the realm of possibility that he gets benched because he's not a consistent player and he makes a lot of mistakes.
What about the other guy that you mentioned, RG3? Now, it's kind of who knows what we're going to see with RG3. He's heading to Cleveland. Now, do you think Hugh Jackson is going to be good for him? I mean, Hugh Jackson worked really well with Dalton. Dalton really turned it around under Hugh, thought. But to me, with RG3, you're going to have to kind of commit to that read option offense, and I don't know that that's going to happen. What do you think we're going to see from RG3 in Cleveland this year?
Well, I think he landed in the right spot for a quarterback guru. I like Hugh Jackson. I think he'll coach him up well. You wonder about the surrounding talent in that offense, first of all, and I guess I'll believe it when I see it that he'll be under center in week 1. Last time we saw him, he needed a complete reboot as a quarterback. He had forgotten how to play the position. So as intrigued as I am with RG3's comeback story, I still believe they're going to take a quarterback at number 2, and they'll probably play him. And I don't believe that RG3 can stay healthy. I just don't believe it. He lacks the instincts to know when to slide, when to throw the ball away. Yeah. And until he finds those, I just don't believe it.
And when it slides, it's like a drunk gopher trying to get below ground. It's not a pretty sight.
That's well put. I have no idea how a high-level athlete like that cannot do a baseball slide.
And honestly, what do you think is to his precipitous fall from glory? Was it the injuries? Was it Shanahan? Was it lack of confidence with an amalgam of all 3 of those things? What do you think really was the hubris there that contributed to his fall?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all that. I think that he ran a 4.38 and was as dynamic as any quarterback we've ever seen as a rookie. And after the injury, he wasn't beating defensive backs. He wasn't even beating linebackers to the edge when he was running. So he wasn't the same dynamic athlete. He lost his confidence. He went to Mike Shanahan and said, I don't want to run the read option anymore. I want to be a drop back passer. And he wasn't ready for that. And if you listen to guys like Steve Young and Trent Dilfer and a bunch of other people, he wasn't willing to put in the classroom work that a high-level NFL starting quarterback needs to decipher defenses at the line of scrimmage and to lead his team coming out of the huddle. So I think it's a combination of all those factors.
See, and I was hoping he would sort of put in that classroom work. I remember after the Heisman was awarded, his hotel at 4 a.m. and their exercise machine, the next day. And I thought that showed a willingness to commit. And I really was kind of surprised that he didn't have it as much in the classroom, didn't seem to study as much as some of the other quarterbacks out there for as much as I thought he would put into it, but he didn't. Now, another big quarterback that has had success and ups and downs, but Flacco. Joe Flacco finds himself with a new toy, and that indeed is Mr. Michael Wallace. Recently just tossed former gunslinger Teddy Bridgewater under the bus for not having an arm. Well, now he's got perhaps the best deep ball throwers in the game. Now, Mike's is just 2 years removed from 10 touchdown season in Miami, which came from Tannehill, not a deep ball thrower. And I believe 9 of those came in the red zone. Tail of 2 seasons for Wallace, 2014, 2015. What do you think we're going to see from him 2016?
He's always a question mark, but I would bank on a little bit of a bounce back. I like the fit with Flacco. Like you said, 2014, he was really good in the red zone and showed a toughness that wasn't there in previous years too. I felt like he battled quite a bit more than his reputation would say. So I would expect a bounce back year there, playing that Torrey Smith deep threat role.
Yeah. Torrey Smith still has a deep threat. I'm just doing some pros and cons, but averages one of the best long ball kickers in the game last year. It'd be interesting to see both those guys and how they do next season. Another guy I'm really interested to see battling injury. I've always been a fan of his. Arian Foster, coming back from an Achilles tear. Now he's going to be 30 at the start of the 2016 season. I did a little digging, and I didn't find many NFL Achilles injury studies. I found the most recent one I found was in 2010, and found that 36% of affected players who their Achilles did not return. 64% returned to the NFL, and that amounted to 31 players. 21 of those 31 over the next seasons saw a regression in play. Their offense decreased. So really, for an Achilles tear injury coming back, the odds are against them. Now that study was 2010. We've come a long way in our medical advancements, and so who knows? But it's a daunting task, nevertheless, for a soon-to-be 30-year-old running back. Mr. Wesseling, if you were a gambling man, sir, would you be betting on Arian Foster as to make a viable comeback in NFL next year?
No, I wouldn't. And I've done a lot of studies on Achilles injuries too. There was a breakthrough in that surgery about when the line of demarcation you're using around 2010, maybe a year or two before that. It's a totally different surgery now, and football players are coming back. It's almost like ACLs in the 1980s versus ACLs now. Football players are coming back from Achilles surgery. Michael Crabtree is a recent example, had a pretty good year last year. That said, I still have not found a running back who came back successfully from Achilles or patellar tendon surgery to the level he played at before. I haven't found a single one. So Arian Foster will be the first, and frankly, I thought he looked slow before the injury last year. He looked like he had lost a step or two. Now, part of that was because he lost training camp and was probably out of shape. But he, to me, would not be a candidate for a great bounce-back season.
You mentioned patella, and I was looking at last year about this time with Victor Cruz. I was looking at tendon injuries, and Cadillac Williams was, I think, the only one that I found that actually had somewhat of a better season after, and that was brief. I think it was one season he actually improved, but that was about it. So both those really tough ones to surmount. Let's move on to a team that's put up some fantastic numbers in the past few seasons. Of course, not so much last year. I bring you, sir, to Green Bay. Now, a couple of places to go here, but let's start with Eddie. I don't think it was quite as simple as just a weight. I think that was a contributing factor, but I don't know if it was just that. So I did some digging. He averaged 4.1 yards per carry last year. Same as what he averaged in 2014, his rookie season. His sixth best running back in standard his rookie year, 4.1 yards, 11 total touchdowns. His O-line, fifth, according to Football Letters, and they scored 26 points per game. 2014. So his sophomore season, average 46, sixth in standard, 13 all-purpose yards, 13 all-purpose TDs. O-line was ranked 8th. So again, first year in the league and 5th. Next year in the league, O-line 8th. They averaged 30.4 points per game in 2014 that led the league. So what's the big difference? This last year, he still averaged 4.1, but the O-line averaged 25th. So down from basically top 10 his first 2 years down to 25th. And then on average, they scored 23 points per game or a full times than the previous season. I'm counting on a bounce back year for Eddie Lacy, contract year 2016. I think he can get it done as long as the O-line can get it done and the Packers can sort of return to scoring form. But what do you think about Lacy's prospects next season?
Look at that comeback. I hear what you're saying. It's not just his weight. NFL offenses work hand in glove. When the passing game's going well, the offensive line's going well, it opens up so many opportunities for the running game. Last year, those opportunities weren't there quite as much because the offense was bogged down. The offensive line had a lot of injuries. It's the same personnel they had the previous 2 years when they were playing well, but they had a lot of injuries. And I think the game film shows, and I am very confident in this, when Eddie Lacy is in good shape, he is a top 6 NFL running back. I have no doubts about that. Eddie Lacy is a ball player when he's in shape, and I think I saw that picture of him. If he's 230, 240 pounds instead of 260 or 270, I think he's going to return to being the guy who was down the stretch in 2014, the only running back in the NFL to be over 100 yards from scrimmage in 10 straight games.
Yeah, I think he's in for a bounce back year. I think he's got a great draft day value. There's a lot of recency bias for owners. I think he's a perfect bounce back candidate. Now, another potential bounce back would probably be, I mean, I guess it's not a bounce back, but a return to glory would be Jordy Nelson. Of course, he missed last year. He was number 3 in PPR the year before that. I think he's number 2 in standard. So we're talking an elite wide receiver. Was missing from this piece of the puzzle last year. Jordy Nelson comes back. Now, he's getting there in age. I did talk to Will Carroll not too long ago, who is an injury expert for one of the paid daily sites. He was very high on Jordy Nelson and his recovery. Thinks he can come back fairly easily with his recovery. All things are looking good. What's your feeling? What's your sense on Jordy Nelson's return the coming season?
Well, I don't think we can say anything with confidence about his injury because we're not close to that situation. I'm not a doctor. So until we see him on the field, until we see the reports coming out of spring practices or training camp, I don't think we can say anything about how he's going to look coming off ACL surgery. All we can say is that he was the best boundary receiver in the NFL and that no wide receiver had a better rapport with his quarterback than Jordy Nelson prior to that injury. So I thought he was a top 5 NFL receiver. If he's back to the same form, then I would expect the same thing again. But I would say until we see him on the field, it's almost useless to say what to expect.
Well, what about a guy we did see on the field last year? And without Nelson, he took a precipitous drop, and that, of course, is Cobb. 2014, 91 receptions. Last year, 69, pretty close. 2014, 127 targets, 129, 2015, but a huge difference in yards and 6 TDs last year versus 12. Is it really just that he was seeing the secondary's best cover corners, or was there some other factors going on with Cobb? And do you think he can return to what we were used to seeing next year on the field?
Yeah, I think it was more than that, and I think it was kind of a perfect storm for him. He injured his shoulder at the end of August, so he played through a separated shoulder, which for any player, and you have a shoulder injury, we saw this with Mark Ingram a couple of years ago, you're not as powerful of a tackle breaker. You're not going to take as many chances. You just lose a lot of power when you're playing through a shoulder injury. So Randall Cobb's punt return skills were almost non-existent. It probably made him a little more hesitant at the catch point, which would explain some of the drops. And then I think, like you said, he's seen extra coverage. One general manager told the Milwaukee Sentinel lately, all you had to do was worry about Randall Cobb in that offense last year, and no one else was a concern. So, of course, he got a lot more attention, and I think he's running different routes too. It took him a little bit out of his comfort zone. So I think if Jordy comes back healthy and is the number one, I think you probably see Randall Cobb back in 2014 for him.
So you think he could be a bounce-back candidate as well as Eddie Lacy? You like Cobb next year then?
Yeah, absolutely. As long as he's healthy and Nelson's healthy. I mean, we know Randall Cobb's a good football player when he's utilized in the right role as that slot guy. So, yeah, I don't have any reason to believe he won't bounce back.
All right. Pyromaniacs. That was Chris Wesseling. Give him a follow over at Twitter at Chris Wesseling. That's ChrisWesselin. I am, of course, PyromaniacMo for the Pyromaniac. Mr. Wesseling, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Thanks, Mo. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Folks, this has been another Fantasy Football Talk on the Pyro Podcast, and we will catch you on the flip side.